Well, Senator Hawley, thank you for joining us this morning. I first want to ask you about the 60-day extension that the Capitol Police has requested from the National Guard. How do you feel about it, and do you feel there's a substantial threat on our nation's capital?
Well, what I feel like is we need to have some clear and a clear path here to when this is going to be over. I mean, if you come to Washington, D.C. right now, you won't even get anywhere close to the Capitol. I mean, there are fences with barbed wire up all around the Capitol. Thousands and thousands of National Guard troops are here. This is not a long-term solution by any stretch of the imagination. What worries me is that we keep getting the date at which we're supposed to return to normal keeps getting pushed out, and it's later and it's later and it's later. So I think what we need to see is some clear indication of what the short and medium-term threats are that the Guard are supposed to be responding to, and then a plan to reinforce security however it needs to be done, but to do so in a way that does not involve fences and barbed wire and armed service members in uniform constantly around the Capitol. I just think that this is the people's house right now. If you come to Washington, you can't get in it. And I think that's a problem.
In regards to the relief bill, what changes do you need to see in the coronavirus relief bill in order to get behind it yourself?
Oh, focus on working people and a focus on the coronavirus. I mean, for a COVID relief bill, it would be nice if it would focus on COVID. But what you see is that the Democrats are spending actually less than 10% of this bill has anything to do with COVID medical relief. And then the relief for workers keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. I mean, the direct relief for workers that I've championed for months now, the Democrats are saying, oh, this is a centerpiece of our bill. Well, every time they touch it, they reduce it. They reduce the number of people it goes to. They reduce the size. They reduce the eligibility. And what gets bigger and bigger and bigger is all their left-wing spending. They are spending tens of millions of dollars on abortion providers. That's in this bill. They're spending tens of millions on environmental justice. That's a quote. That is in this bill.
Well, you've mentioned that you're a proponent of the idea of $15 minimum wage for billion-dollar corporations. I mean, what do you tell the mom and pop shops who that would ultimately affect, because the people who might be applying to jobs at their stores end up going for the places that are paying that minimum wage of $15?
Well, one of the reasons I think there ought to be a differential on that small businesses shouldn't have to pay that high of a wage is because it really would be crushing for those mom and pop shops that you mentioned. And I worry that it would lead to further economic consolidation. What we've seen for a couple of decades now in this country is more and more consolidation. The big companies get bigger, small businesses go out of business. New businesses are just not starting. New businesses starts have been down since the Great Recession under President Obama, which is now, 15 years ago. So this is a long-term problem. But if you're a big corporation, do $1 billion in revenue more a year, you could afford to pay a $15 minimum wage that would be phased in. So I think that we ought to do that for the biggest corporations. And then I think every worker in our state who makes at the median wage or below ought to get a tax credit, ought to be able to keep more of their money. And so I proposed a plan called the Blue Collar Bonus that would allow every worker who makes $16.50 an hour or less to get a tax credit that would be advanced to them in their paycheck to raise their wages. And that's what I think we ought to do to help workers.
Well, Senator, I just want to go back to that for a second, because I mean, while it does absolutely, it tackles the billion-dollar corporations, paying their employees more, it does create competition, and maybe more difficult competition for those small businesses. So, I mean, what do you say to them to make them not be concerned that they could miss out on, in an area that might be a college town, for example? A lot of those college students will be working at the big box store maybe instead of that mom and pop shop because of that differential, almost, a 2 times the difference wage.
Yeah, well, not in our state. I mean, I would say, remember, our state passed the minimum wage law. We're on a glide path right now up to $12 an hour. We're currently sitting, I think it's $10.30 an hour, on its way up. So the differential ultimately will not be significant, not be as significant. It won't be double, is my point. But I think for mom and pop shops, where I'm particularly concerned about those are in rural areas where you have, let's say one grocery store that might serve a 20 or 30 mile radius and employ 7 or 8 people, and they just can't afford to pay $15 an hour. I mean, it would bankrupt them, to your point. So I think that my proposal, which would raise the minimum wage over time for the biggest corporations, wouldn't really affect those shops, particularly in those areas, rural areas. And I think mom and pop shops in other areas, small businesses, have ways to differentiate themselves in terms of what they provide for their employees, the kind of atmosphere they have, other benefits that I would hope would allow them to continue to do well and prosper. And I think the fact that they'd be able to hire entry-level folks at a little bit lower wage would be good for them, and that's an advantage for them. But listen, I think the way to get every worker on an even playing field here is to pass my blue-collar bonus, which would give everybody who makes $16.50 or less a wage increase by giving them a tax credit that's advanced to their paycheck. I mean, this would be a huge help. Under my plan, if you make the minimum wage in Missouri right now, you would get over $6,000 a year back in your paycheck under my blue-collar bonus. That's pretty substantial.
Senator Hawley, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us this morning. We're going to have our full conversation on our website, KOAMNewsNow.com. We'll be right back on the KOAM Morning News after this.